Please, a pavement coffee. And good evening. Today is Tuesday, June 8th, 2021. I'm your host, Evan George, and welcome to Bostopia Nightly News, where I give you the rundown of the news of the day, some thoughts, some clips, some good times. To the TikTok audience, I recommend hopping over, joining me on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook to get the full show. Otherwise, you're looking down at my chin. And to everyone else, your top stories for tonight are another Massachusetts trooper was accused of assaulting his wife in front of their children. The MBTA Fiscal Management Control Board voted unanimously on Monday to punt on any sort of fare decreases. The red to blue line connector is estimated at approximately $850 million. Multiple, or at least one, Boston School Committee member resigned over her text leaking, referring to whiteys in West Roxbury. And of course, Boston is in the middle of a heat wave that is just devastating, not just the city, but also my apartment. Also, the State House will be voting on whether or not to include the Millionaires tax on the 2022 ballot initiative. We have some op-eds, and we have clips from a recent Boston City Council hearing that I have not heard yet, but talking about the BPDA, which is always a favorite topic of mine. So all this and more. And going to what I think is on everyone's mind, the heat. My God, the heat. So the recent heat wave that Boston finds itself in is actually hits another milestone. This was announced yesterday, that the amount of carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere reached 419 parts per million in May. Now that means absolutely nothing to me, but according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, this is the highest level that we've had on this planet more than 4 million years ago. Continuing, we are adding roughly 40 billion metric tons of CO2 pollution in the atmosphere per year, said a senior scientist in this institution. The last time the atmosphere held similar amounts was during the Pliocene period, where sea levels were 78 feet higher than they are right now. And basically meaning, from my basic understanding of the history of humanity, well before any human beings walked the planet. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that remains in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. The last century of steep increases in carbon dioxide is driven almost entirely by human activity, mainly the burning of fossil fuels. Now, how this pertains to Boston in particular is, let me see if I can bring up for you the most recent article from the Boston Globe. Our Herald will do just fine. Is the heat wave yesterday hit near 100 degrees after 3 straight days of 90+ weather, and another time when the temperature never dipped below 70 degrees. Now I actually do want to get this Boston Globe because it has a fantastic chart that is very, very well done to show just how devastating this recent heat wave is. Everyone will bear with me. Oh, maybe I can't find it. Aha. All right, this article from Boston Globe yesterday by Sabrina Shankman. Scrolling down now to the chart. Average number of days per year with recorded low temperatures when the low hits 70 or higher in the Boston area, which is this nice red line right here. And so from data going back until 1873, there were 6 days where it never received lower than 70 degrees in terms of the temperature. And as you can tell by this chart, we have been on a steady increase every decade for the past 150 years, culminating in a 33% jump, which looks to be the largest. It isn't, it's the second largest in the last 150 years, of days where, again, the temperature never gets below 70 degrees. Let's see if we can read some nice experts of this. It has been getting consistently warmer, and invariably that means what was a warm day 20 years ago is going to be a lot warmer today, simply because the background has shifted. The climatologist at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. The evidence is clear that the first heat wave is the most deadly, and that seems to be particularly true in places like Boston, where we're not really used to the heat. Boston Emergency Medical Services experienced a 31% increase in call volume on Saturday and Sunday compared to a typical day. This was according to the office of Kim Janey. Reading further, a 2020 study found that under the worst case scenario, Boston could see between 200 and 500 excess deaths from extreme heat by 2090. Another study showed that even with moderate warming scenarios, we'll see a 4-fold increase in extreme heat deaths, which does not sound pleasant. All this is pointing to really just how striking any sort of lack of urgency exists at the Massachusetts State House, our lawmakers, City Council, about what not just the world, but also just Boston in particular is facing. And something that is always on my mind is that as the temperature continues to increase, as the climate becomes more hospitable, we will use more and more energy to try to balance it out, which will only exacerbate the ongoing crisis. So unless we do 2 things, which is 1, keep the gas and the oil and the crude and the tar sands where they are in the ground, and 2, get the carbon out of the air, things are going to continue to get much, much worse. But moving on from this, and I'm going to close some tabs for the people watching on the Twitch, so you can all bear with me. The second story that I wanted to get to concerns what the State House will be voting on tomorrow, which is on a whether or not to have a 2022 ballot initiative, the ballot question on the millionaire's tax. And this will not be the first time I discuss this. This is not the first time, in fact, that I have on this program. But what progressives, anyone who takes a look at the current inequality within Massachusetts, about the state of our finances, about the under-investment we've made in housing and transportation and infrastructure in our schools, we need to start taxing billionaires at a higher rate than we tax people who make minimum wage. This sounds like common sense to a lot of people. However, we do not do that. Our Constitution has established a flat tax, and I'll get to that in a second. So what they will be voting on tomorrow is whether or not to allow on the 2022 ballot a 4% increase on a personal income tax above $1 million. The current tax rate, and this is constantly in flux, it might be a clean 5. Let me see if I can quickly scan and find it. Yep. Right now it is a flat tax, 5% of your income. It doesn't matter if you make minimum wage, doesn't matter if you make $1 billion just that year. Every single dollar is taxed at that 5%. What this will now do is after you've hit $1 million, or maybe it's $999,999, that $1 that puts you over the edge to $1 million will now be taxed at 9%. So you can still make your $1 million at the current 5%. Every dollar after that is at 9%. And there's really no legitimate arguments, though I'm going to dismantle a couple right now, just so people are prepared for this. There is somewhere between 17 to 19,000, let's just break it even, 18,000 millionaires and billionaires here in Massachusetts. And again, the idea that their income should be taxed at the same rate as the school teachers, or restaurant workers, is completely absurd. And this will increase state revenue by roughly $2 billion per year. Now, the reason it needs to be taxed, and I'm going to get to the op-ed about this. Oh, here's a little history about the state of our income tax. I'm looking over at the Twitch channel. You're going to drop the ProPublica piece, because I'm not familiar with what you're referring to. Massachusetts has been steadily cutting its taxes, and this is not just income tax, even though this is what this particular piece by the Tax Foundation, which is, again, a more right-wing publication, but I wanted to be fair. So taxes on a number of different things have been decreasing. This just is focused on the income tax. Wherein, I'm just going to read the chart, in 1989, it went up slightly from 5% to 5.75%. 1990, 6.25%. Oh, but then 92, down to 5.95. 2000, cut to 5.85. And then later on in 2000, they voted on basically what would be a steady decrease to the 5% tax that we currently have. Now, what makes it unique is that this has to be dictated by our Constitution. And so one of the most disingenuous arguments that you're going to hear, and this is just completely absurd, so I had to bring it up, by James Rooney, which says that, you know what, we can talk about whether or not we should tax millionaires and billionaires a little bit more than waitresses, but we shouldn't be doing this through the Constitution, so everyone should vote no about this. I'm going to read some of the arguments and then explain why we have to do it this way. Then going to the second paragraph. The Massachusetts Constitution is the world's oldest functioning one and a model for the U.S. Constitution. It is a governing guide for our state and society, social compact, as the preamble states. Now, what makes this comical is that the Massachusetts Constitution, when it was written, was probably the most anti-democratic and restrictive out of all the state constitutions. So much so that the reason it is the model of our U.S. Constitution is because of how good it was at restricting the rights and the very principles of democracy. Because once the Articles of Confederation failed to put enough checks on state democracy, this is like the quick period that is normally very quick glanced over in elementary school. Everyone has probably heard of the Shays Rebellion if you're listening to this. But the real reason, not just the Shays Rebellion and the whiskey drinkers in Western Mass who didn't want their taxes increases, that is part of it, was that after the revolution, the rich capitalists who basically inherited power, who pushed us for the revolution because they wanted Western expansion, but the British kind of had a hardly defined Western border, the results of the French and Indian War, 7 Years' War. Different topic for a different day. They needed to get the money back. They needed to raise money to recuperate how much they spent during the revolution. And so they decided to put a tax, put it on the farmers, make the farmers pay for it. The landowners, they're not paying for it. And in Pennsylvania, their state constitution was one of the most democratic. And even, of course, black people were not allowed to vote, slaves were not allowed to vote, women were not allowed to vote. In the confines of white men, it was the most democratic. And so the white male farmers in that area basically said, F this, we're not paying for the revolution we just had. Let the rich landowners, let the rich merchants from Boston, they can pay for it. We're not doing that. And then all of a sudden, the founding fathers realized they had a problem because the Articles of Confederation did not put enough checks on state democracy. So under the guise of amending it, they decided to rip up the Articles of Confederation, which they were completely an illegal maneuver, which is not outlined in the Articles of Confederation, and just redrafted it. And what did they use as their guide to create an anti-democratic document? The Massachusetts Constitution. That was a very long segue, just for me to get to that one point. So as this person pontificates about its greatness, it was chosen for that reason, because of how horrible it was. It's been amended roughly 120 times. Let's see. What standards must be met for a proposal to be embedded in our Constitution rather than considered by the legislature? This is why I wanted to read this. There is no one who thinks that we should have to amend the Constitution whenever we want to change tax policy. No one. And the reason it was put in our Constitution, because again, they know how difficult it is to change. So absolutely, myself, everyone wants this taken out of the Constitution, but it was put in there in the first place to make it difficult for us to change it. And that is why the strategy to change it is we need to make an amendment to the Constitution. Nobody wants to go this route. So this person is disingenuously acting like this is the tactic that is chosen. Going back to the right-wing tax foundation, about how unusual this is. This is now from 2016. This is not the first attempt that we've tried this, to get this slight increase in millionaires and billionaires. What does it say? More unusual is putting the tax rate directly in the state constitution. I'm just going to go off this person. Skimmed through state constitutions and found that only 2 other instances, California and Alabama. And besides that, everyone else does it a different way. I wish we could also not have to amend our Constitution. It's purposely a pain in the ass to do. But the op-ed, which is trying to appeal to, is it a good idea to create a new tax on income over $1 million? It may be. It may not be. But it's a specific policy and not a principle to enshrine in the state's constitution. It's already enshrined in the state constitution. It's already enshrined in the state constitution. He knows this. From the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Whose interest do you think that person represents? Theirs and their friends. Please. There's another op-ed I want to hit. Oh, one more thing, just because I have it teed up, is another disingenuous. Oh, I know what you're talking about now, my friend over on Twitch. I didn't read the full article. I saw a headline of it. And we'll probably see this tomorrow, so maybe I'll hit this again tomorrow, is the prospect that, well, guess what? If you raise taxes on the rich, they're going to leave, and then you're not going to be able to tax them. So this is a horrible idea. This is a basic hypothesis, which is absolutely fine to entertain. However, every analysis of the data shows that it's bullshit, and it doesn't actually happen like this. There are hundreds of studies that have confirmed this. I pulled just one that went through about 6 different states. So here's what this study did from 2014. It evaluated what Massachusetts is right now trying to do across New Jersey, California, Maryland, Hawaii, Wisconsin, Oregon, New York, Connecticut, California, Minnesota. All states that had a slight increase into their income tax for the wealthy. And as you can see, I'll magnify it for the viewing audience, their numbers are a lot higher than what we're proposing. Right now we're proposing 9% for the millionaires and billionaires. California, this is 2005, 10.3%. Hawaii, 11. Oregon, 11. New York, 8.97. California, 13.3. Minnesota, 9.85. Plenty of states have much higher than the 9 that Massachusetts is suggesting. And so how they did this study, I'll get to the methodology, I believe it's down here. We use big data from administrative tax records to establish a virtual census of millionaires in their respective states. Specifically, they're looking at New Jersey from 2000 to 2007, California 1987 2009, to see what happened to the millionaires in those states, and then also a control group of other millionaires and billionaires who live in other states that were not affected by the taxes, and then trying to see if there's any migration difference. Yes, good point, Joe. How's what's his name? Jeff Bezos going to make it back on a space flight? And now, what did it say? I'll jump to the conclusion, and then we'll go into a little bit about what they ended up finding. Conclusion. Thought I decided with a good sentence. However, in a recent comprehensive review, concluded that the jurisdictional competition has been wildly exaggerated, and that differences in the regulatory burden across states seldom cause significant numbers of firms to relocate. Most of the potential regulatory races are non-starters, basically saying that people do not move because of this. This seems to be equally true of state tax competition. While millionaire tax flight is an intuitive concern, as I said before, it is a good hypothetical for somebody to bring up. Evidence of it is difficult to find. Our analysis, however, does not mean that states have a free hand to engage in runaway taxing of the rich. I disagree with that point. We have evaluated modest tax increases in the range of 1% to 3%. We're doing 4 if anyone wants to say, well, this isn't applicable. Moreover, states should spend millionaire tax revenues with caution. Okay, so now they're hedging their bet, basically saying, please keep funding us. But as their data shows, that there was no massive tax flight. One of the biggest reasons that you see rich people travel more than poor people, that's just a fact. Rich people travel more than poor people for very obvious reasons. Rich people have the means to travel. Rich people have the time to travel. Poor people, they don't get the money, they don't get the time. And so when you do see flight, it is normally senior citizens who are moving to Florida. But this will be a talking point. And again, this was just one study. There are literally hundreds I could have picked. But this went through most of the states that experienced any sort of an increase. There's one more op-ed I want to hit, and then we're going to get to the Boston City Council hearing. This was completely out of left field. However, because the Herald talked about it, I get to talk about it. That's the general rule here. This is from Robbins. New Israeli leaders confront inane U.S. left. Yes, we're talking about Israel. Actually, maybe I look better over here. Here we go. Okay, by Jeff Robbins. So, I mean, it's mean to probably pick on him, but if you print it in the Boston Globe or the Boston Herald, I get to comment on it. Starting, last week's formation of a new Israeli government comprised parliament members from across the country's wide political spectrum. Israel does not have a wide political spectrum. It was good news for Israel, which needs to move on from longtime Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Skipping along further, along their challenges are an American left that increasingly embraces the narrative that the massive rocketing of Israeli civilians by Hamas is more or less fine, and Israeli attempts to stop it constitute war crimes. This inanity captivates American progressives who have swallowed it whole. Now, obviously, this is referring to the Israeli attack, occupation, and there is no other word for it, cleansing of Gaza, which happened just, I believe, last week or the week before. Now, I'm going to keep reading, and notice how they point to Hamas and how they describe Hamas. Each time Hamas has used Gazans as human shields to fire thousands of rockets at Israeli communities. Now, the concept of human shields, and the reason you hear that so often, is it basically is meant to say, do not look at the civilian death count. Please, God, do not think of them as humans. Do not think of them as civilian deaths. Do not look at the innocent men, women, and children who are being killed by Israel. They're not people. They're human shields. Israel didn't have a choice, which, as one of the largest refugee settlements in the world, being compacted in one of the densest areas in the world, every time Israel shoots rockets into them, they are not being prompted by human shields. That's where the people live. So the trick of this, and why you hear that phrase so often, human shields, is it's meant to deflect blame. It's meant to say that these casualties are not the fault of the person who fired the gun or the person that launched the missile, but this insidious force that also is not a human. And that's what I meant by focus on how they comment on Gaza. When Israel tried to stop the rocketing and reduce Hamas's ability to conduct it, again, making it sound like Hamas or Palestinians launched the first attack, which absolutely was not the case, Gazans, who Hamas was happy to sacrifice for public relations gains, were killed. It requires no genius to grasp that Hamas actually wants to kill Israelis in order to terrorize them and wants Gazans to die to dupe the left into blaming Israel. So notice how in this, again, inane gibberish, there is no attempt to look at the agency or the rationale or even to understand who Hamas is. Hamas is just a dark, evil force. They're the orcs of Lord of the Rings. You do not view them as people with any sort of agency, any sort of involvement, any sort of humanity. They want to kill Israelis for no other reason, according to this, but just to kill Israelis. They want to terrorize them for no other reason than just to terrorize them. They want Gazans to die for no other reason than for Gazans to die. It is to try to trick you into thinking, do not, again, even view Hamas as people that are either trying to do a military counteroffensive or any political gain. They are just evil for evil's sake, period. And I wonder if Jeff goes into Israel's creation of Hamas, which is something which very little, didn't seem to get talked about that much, how it was actually Israeli that propped up Hamas. Let's see, what else do you have? Would it constitute wisdom for Israel to simply permit Hamas to carpet Israeli civilians with thousands of rockets every time it saw fit? Again, one, that isn't what happened. It was Israeli expansion and aggression and cleansing of the area, which then caused Hamas's military to respond, who don't have smart bombs, who don't have guided missiles. As any serious person who gives it a minute's thought realizes, there is no way for Israel to stop Hamas from waging war against it without Gazans being hurt. Again, making it seem that it is Hamas that is waging war with Israel, expanding into Israel, when it is actually the exact opposite. What else you have? Oh, right here. So true, so obvious. Just as true and obvious the last times before. Irrelevant. And so irrelevant as far as the left concerned. Thankfully, not everyone on the Democratic left has lost their minds and their spines. U.S. Representative Richie Torres, a black, openly gay congressman representing the South Bronx, is not buying into the hogwash being peddled by congressional colleagues like Ayanna Pressley. Now, notice how the right wing, I mean, they are the masters of using identity politics. And exactly when they see fit, they will hold up someone and say, oh, look, a black, openly gay congressperson, using them as a human shield for their argument. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others who hold themselves out as progressives while apologizing for Hamas's crime against both Gazans and Israelis. One, Hamas won a democratic election in Gaza in 2006. Let's go into that. The hysterical demonization of Israel has set off a global wave of anti-Semitic violence and vitriol, said Torres days ago. He is right, and a troubling number of Democrats share in the responsibility for it. Again, that it is the quote-unquote left's fault for calling Israelis expansion, Israelis cleansings, Israelis, you can't even use the word eviction properly in this context, disproportional bombing of innocent civilians, calling that out is actually what is creating the rise in anti-Semitism, which is absolutely bullshit. But not my usual thing to talk about. I saw it in the Herald, wanted to comment on it. And that is very true, as I look at the chat. Okay. Looking at the TikTok stream now. Yeah, I'm Bostopia News on everything. You can find me, and I definitely recommend switching because then you can get the nice little visuals. Now, the video that I have for tonight. Oh, that threw me. Boop. I quickly saw it, and now it is starting 50 minutes in. And the reason for it is because the audio was all jacked up for the first half. But it's about the BPDA, Boston Planning Development Agency. That is the quasi-public, quasi-private entity that we allow to basically govern development in Boston. And if you control development, if you control housing, if you can control zoning, you control the city. You literally get to dictate who lives here and where. So I want to hear what the questions the City Council asks the BPDA. And it's always my favorite thing to talk about because it is honestly probably by far the most important thing. Let me just fix the cameras for the people watching on the YouTube and the Twitch. Okay. And let's see how they do.
Super garbled, so I think it is up and running stronger now. So after a bit of a delay, we are now going to Councilor Campbell. Oh, sorry, I'm calling this hearing back to order, I should formally say. Councilor Campbell, are you there? I'm gonna have to text her and tell her to come back.
I'm here.
Excellent. All right, we're back.
Thank you.
And better than ever.
God bless you and Carrie. God bless you all. This is awesome. So thank you so much. Thank you, of course, to the BPDA for your work, particularly during COVID. Not an easy time, so thank you all. I'll jump right into questions. Obviously, I'm sure other councils will get to this too. There is, and I'm sure folks at the BPDA have also heard this, considerable distrust in community with the BPDA. We get a lot of emails and calls with respect to lack of transparency, lack of information inequities, et cetera. So really happy with, frankly, Barry's new role and the work in that office and some great things that are moving the department forward. But one of the things I did want to flag is Lori Radwin sent an email, and it should be as part of the record for this council hearing, Councilor Bach. It had incredible detail, case studies. This is a constituent, a resident, around how to improve the BPDA. I think it's an incredible email. I'm flagging it so that every person on this Zoom can take a look and really process her specific ideas. And sometimes people don't come with specific ideas on how to improve the agency. So I want to flag that, because it would take a whole Zoom to go through it just to really talk through the good ideas in it. My questions. Some residents have asked, has the BPDA considered using tools such as Nextdoor, Universal Hub to share information with residents? Has the department considered listing all project-related meetings on the BPDA's website and posting meeting minutes? That's one question. The second is, how do we as an agency, or how does the agency, I should say, manage the list of civic associations to make sure you guys have the most up-to-date information. Who handles that? What does that look like? My last question, I guess two more and then I'll stop. Has the agency considered guidelines around the length of time a developer speaks at meetings so that residents and abutters can speak and ensure all their voices are heard? We're obviously doing virtual meetings. I think it's something we should continue hybrid, but that's a lot of concerns we've gotten from residents around not being heard at some of the meetings. And then the last question is, Barry, in your new leadership role, what have been some of the greatest lessons? Where do you think the department needs to go? If you could just talk a little bit more about your office's work, that would be great.
All right. I mean, all this is just cutting around the edges. Ultimately, what has to happen, what Michelle Wu continues to champion, with some at-large candidates also, is we need to get rid of the BPDA in some capacity. Again, it is an opaque agency that has full control over what is being developed. They get appointed by the mayor, by the governor. There is some approval that has to go through the Boston City Council as well, but even that is very generally not understood even by myself. And what they're talking about now is how do we improve the meetings the BPDA has? How do we make sure more people in the community know about what developments are going on? How do we give people in the community more time to quote unquote be heard? Which sure, I support. I want more people to know about the developments. It's a pain in the ass to figure out what is being built, when is it being talked about. However, when they have those meetings and the people, because I've been to them, I've spoken at them, to try to push back and highlight why this development is dangerous and bad for the city, for the neighborhood, for the area, they sit there, they say, thank you, you have been heard, stamp, and then they go on with the project. And so it's not enough to just be heard if your voice actually has no power, if you do not actually get to have any accountability, any fingerprints over what does and does not get built in your neighborhood. And so I'm not interested in giving people more time to be heard. We need to give people actual agency and power over some say of what gets built. But yeah, let's skip halfway through and have this guy.
Next one was meetings on website. So every community meeting we have is on our website.
Oh, that's
and
good.
We also use some of those platforms to put it out there.
That's awesome. Thank you.
And in terms of, we are also posting everything. Every meeting is now recorded and posted to the website as well. And the chat function, the result of the chat or the Q&A function included with Zoom is also posted to the website. But again, any questions or thoughts on that, happy to engage in that as well. And the last piece on timelines, this is something that we try really, really hard to do to limit developers trying to run out the clock at a community meeting. We have the same frustrations. We want to get to the community dialogue. We're always trying to balance the right amount of sharing information on complex things versus getting to community dialogue. Our goal is to try to limit it to 30 minutes. I recognize that sometimes we do a better job than that than others, and we will continue to redouble our efforts to try to put developers on a clock when they're talking. I think we've made some good progress in that in the age of Zoom, but as we all know, and I'm guilty of that myself, sometimes people can run a little bit long when they're excited about sharing their stuff. So something we will absolutely continue to look at and try to limit.
I appreciate that, because we definitely want, obviously abutters and others to feel like they're heard as a way.
See this language of always feeling heard? We just want people to feel heard. They don't get any power. They don't get any say over what's happening, but they'll get to feel heard.
Way to rebuild trust.
God, it's exhausting.
With community who often feels unheard. And then the last was just around the civic associations. Who manages those lists to make sure they're updated, et cetera? I might have missed that part.
Council, that's my office. I am actually responsible for that office and stuff like that. So we're actually working on that effectively as we speak right now.
Okay, so feel free to connect at least with the civics in District 4. We maintain lists as well, so happy to be helpful to you and your team there, Barry.
All right, we're going to jump to Julia Mejia.
So I can wait for the next round.
See what she has.
Well, Councilor Mejia is next, and then it'll be Councilor Clarity. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Yes, good morning all. I'm happy to be here, and I definitely have some questions. We've been hearing from a lot of our constituents about Article 80 process, particularly with impact advisory groups. People feel very strongly about making changes to the IAG process, including requiring the impact advisory groups to reflect neighborhoods better by bringing in more people into the process who have never been involved. Has the BPDA done any sort of audit of the IAG process to see how improvements can be made? We're also curious as how can we change the process throughout which abutters are notified? I'm particularly curious as to whether or not we have any data that we collect in terms like either attendance sheets. Is there a threshold for a number of participants that are participating in these meetings? A quota of sorts to ensure that X amount of abutters and not just homeowners, but also the renters that live in the immediate area have a voice and a say. So I'd like to see some sort of like metrics in terms of how we're really quantifying what real community voice looks like. I'd love to know how we're defining stakeholders, depending on who you ask. Stakeholders are sometimes could just be the local businesses that live in the area, that are doing business in the area. Sometimes it's landlords who don't live in Boston that have no real stake in the city planning and development process. So I'm just curious about how can we redefine what a stakeholder is and hold ourselves accountable to that. And then I'm curious, what are actionable goals that the BPDA team has around measuring success for your DEI efforts? That's for now, and then I may have some questions.
I'm not familiar with the first acronym.
I'll answer a couple of first of all, thank you for your questions.
I mean, it's still cutting around the edges. DEI, diversity, inclusion initiatives. Let's see what this guy says.
I'll answer a couple things, and I think we'll kick it to Barry on the DE&I stuff. Just quickly, I know we had a hearing a few weeks ago with you on IAGs, and we're still sorting through that. But
what are IAGs?
We do agree with, and we'd love to work with all councilors, actually all electeds on, is that we believe stakeholders has a very wide definition, right? And so we do not have any preference in terms of renter versus owner. I think we want to make sure that if you are a neighborhood stakeholder in a broadly defined way, if you have a stake in your neighborhood, if you care about this neighborhood, we want you involved in the process, both on an IAG and just as a general participant. So when we work with each office of electeds on nominations for IAGs, we are more than...
This guy's eyes freaking me out if anyone else is watching the video.
Happy to get nominations from a wide range of backgrounds, a wide range of walks of life. And so when we talk with your office or any other office about that, we want to make sure that we're doing our best to reflect the neighborhood.
See, again, all this, it's not enough to have commissions or advisory boards. Ultimately, what this will always boil down to is who gets the final say in the development. And the BPDA's stated policy is to increase property value. If that is your target, if that is your only concern, if the agency yourself actually benefits from whenever there are increases in property value because they make money off the rents or they lease some of the properties out, then you are not actually taking into account any sort of larger vision for the neighborhood. You're just picking what development, what plot of land is going to get you the most money. Okay, what next plot of land is going to get you the most money? Okay, and if there's no vision for the city, that's why Boston is one of the most unequal places to live in the country. Why we have one of the highest rents in the country. Why we're in a housing crisis for a decade, and that was before COVID hit. So I'm not interested in how do we get more renters on your advisory, unless you're giving people the power to change it. It's going to be the same appointed board that makes the decisions. See what Julia asks him next.
Focus more on making sure we have as much participation as possible.
Right, so when you capture data, are you getting like addresses? Do we know whether or not these folks actually live in the neighborhood that we're talking about?
I think we're always trying to balance, Counselor, asking for...
Where's this, guys? I'm done with that person.
We kind of regurgitate what you already said, so we're actually working on more effective ways and platforms to how we do communication to ensure clear identification of stakeholdership and how we use language access to improve our relationships and connectivity toward the community. So we're really proud of the efforts that we're making, but we, like I said, we would love to hear more feedback on how we can do better in that space as well.
Thank you, Councilor Bob. Thank you all. That's all for me. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Flaherty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and let me start off by thanking all the folks.
I mean, Flaherty's not going to say anything that interesting. I'm just curious. You get 30 seconds, Flaherty, go.
Hats. I was speaking regularly with Director Golden, along with Mike Christopher and Jonathan Greeley throughout the pandemic, dealing obviously with neighborhood development issues across the city, some that were sort of slightly put on hold. And then to see them transition and wear multiple hats, particularly on the food distribution side, as well as the PPE delivery side. So hats off to the great work that they all did as a unit, working at the end of the Wall Street administration to make sure that we were making...
I'm just speeding through them right now.
Throughout the pandemic, but make sure that food was getting to, particularly culturally popular food.
Okay.
Food was getting to the places they needed. I know personally I was dealing with a lot of our nonprofits that were servicing our seniors and our most vulnerable residents, and I was calling Director Golden and Mike Christopher and Jonathan regularly to make sure that...
okay. Is he filibustering? What is this, Flaherty?
Really critical and able to eventually enable to build out and further build out the city. Currently, we have about a dozen kind of full-scale planning initiatives that are actively underway.
I'm just going to skip down to Liz Brianna.
Smaller initiatives, and then you add the...
Right, and I think is that the sheer scale of what's happening is that the community is getting exhausted. It's been going on for about 10 years now, and people are really struggling to get their head around all the different pieces, moving parts of the of all the development that's happening. And it would be really helpful, I think, back to our previous conversation about a district-wide master plan, to really have a district-wide perspective, and because you can't build a couple of million square feet of development in North Austin and not have it affect the rest of the neighbourhood. It has a ripple effect across the district, especially because of transit issues. So I'm really making another pitch, and I will keep pitching until we hopefully get somewhere, is to really try and have a really comprehensive area-wide plan, acknowledging that we will focus on some corridors, but that we need to tie it all together with an area-wide plan. I also wanted to say thank you to BPDA for taking our suggestion of having an executive summary at the front of a project PNF. Hopefully that will improve communications and decrease the level of frustration of our community members who want to get their head around what a project is without having to read 200 pages of pretty dense technical information. So apart from that, I just look forward to really exploring ways that we can continue to have a hybrid model for IAG meetings and public meetings on development. We found during the pandemic that many more people have been able to access the meetings because of the...
Again, they're still talking about how to access the meetings where the BPDA and a developer tells you what's going to happen, sits back, listens to all your complaints about how you're going to be gentrified, how your family won't be able to afford to live there anymore. They say thank you and they stamp the project. If this is the extent of the vision of the city council, then we are in lots of trouble.
There we are.
Lydia Edwards, what do you got?
Councilor Edwards, you have the floor.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean, I had some technical difficulties. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
On my end too. My apologies. So I just wanted to follow up on some budgeting items and then also some parts of my district. So as you know, we negotiated a great deal, I think, in getting Suffolk Downs done. And part of that deal and part of the PDA, and
So Suffolk Downs was a massive failure, atrocity of a development. It's basically like a whole new neighborhood in East Boston, which is now owned by a 33-year-old Texas billionaire.
The cooperation agreement is $400,000 to be committed from the city to help with the newly to be formed trust or displacement or housing trust for East Boston. And I just want to make sure that that commitment is still real and that it's going to happen. Because I didn't see what page it is on in the budget, but maybe you can just confirm to me on that. I wanted to check in about your thoughts about increasing linkage.
Wait, how much?
Can you hear me? And then also some parts of my district. So as you know, we negotiated a great deal, I think, in getting Suffolk Downs done. And part of that deal and part of the PDA, and I think the cooperation agreement is $400,000 to be committed from the city to...
$400,000, that's it? For a... God, how many billions of dollars was the Suffolk Downs development? I gotta Google it. I'm sorry. 400,000? You can't even buy half of a condo for 400,000. What is that supposed to do in a trust? $8 billion. An $8 billion private development owned by some 30-year-old from Texas who inherited his money when his grandfather fell off the tractor he was riding. $400,000. We get half a condo as part of the package. Awesome.
Help with the newly to be formed trust or displacement or housing trust for East Boston. And I just want to make sure that that commitment is still real and that it's going to happen. Because I didn't see what page it is on in the budget.
$400,000. Awesome.
I wanted to check in about your thoughts about increasing linkage. I know that you guys were part of working with the prior administration and helping to increase it already. I think 40%, keeping it at least up to modern what it should have been, right, if it had been increasing along the way. But I think many of us still think there's room to grow. Same with IDP, what reforms. But I understand if you wanted to stick with linkage, that's okay, because IDP had a good conversation with DND, and I do know that they're interested in some forms of different measuring sticks and measuring applications for when it does kick in. And then I'll end with, as you may be aware, I recently filed a zoning amendment to remove the ZBA from the cannabis discussion, specifically after the board has made its decision. That's the cannabis board, the newly formed cannabis board. I think it's a year old now. Has made a decision to grant a license or not grant a license. I think at that point, an applicant should be able to go on to the CCC if they have their license / HDA. And I didn't know if the PDA had an opinion about that or would be stepping in to provide an opinion about that. So those are my initial questions. Oh, and finally, this is just an account.
That one's interesting. That's the only one that isn't pissing me off is right now, like the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is like another opaque agency within our city government that gets to have some approval over the zoning. They also, because of how we constructed our marijuana licensing, basically gets to say, I think it's a half-mile radius. So you cannot build another marijuana, I'll use the word dispensary, within a half-mile radius of another one. So what ended up happening was that because they were already medical dispensaries before the legalization effort happened, large corporations were able to come in, get the licenses from there, then also just strategically place themselves throughout the city because they have the wealth and the finance to able to hire the lawyers to go through the process. They were able to just pick parts of the city to control little bubbles. And so all these initiatives over, we want to make sure first-time business owners from majority people of color, the most impacted from the war on drugs, they get to have licensing. No, because of our zoning code, which is why whenever you want to control a city, you control its development, you control its zoning. So I agree with removing the ZBA's process.
Counting that I'd love to get, I think, on an annual basis from the Navy Yard, and incomes brought in from the Navy Yards, either the resale part of the Navy Yard or any income in general on BPA land in District 1.
So, Councilor, I think there'll be three answers here. I'll just quickly, it'll be me, then Michelle on Lincoln IDP, and then Devin on the Navy Yard. So just quickly, the answer is yes. I was able to connect with budget after talking with your staff last night. Their understanding as well is $400,000 of city capital in the budget. I think it'll be in D&D's budget in support of rental relief for East Boston as part of the overall Suffolk Downs approval. So
400,000, half a condo.
This morning.
Thank you.
Hello. With regard to linkage, just for the record, we did update linkage, 42% increase in February, and BPDA staff are currently working to update linkage again for July 1st based on a consumer price index formula. I'm happy to get back to you with more details once we have those.
I want to get an accurate definition of their linkage fees because I think I might just be using it wrong in my head. Is the 42% she was referring to. Requires large-scale commercial developments over 100,000 square feet in Boston to pay into a fund, which is supposed to go to affordable housing. 42%. So what is the current, let me look at this very quickly. I want to know what the current number is. Is that this big 400,000? Bum. No, these are just more about developments they did. So for every development over 100,000 square feet, they have to pay $15.39 per square foot into an affordable housing trust. And again, when they say affordable, they're not actually talking about the people who need it. The average median income of a person in Boston is like $37,000. The affordable units that end up going to these pockets are people who make 70, 80, 90,000 a year. Almost double, more than double sometimes, what the actual just median take home is for someone in Boston. So we're not going to linkage our way out of it, though obviously I support. Because for the developers, this is just like a little line item. They're making so much money, completely unaccountable, with nobody really tracking any of this, of how much of an investment they're making because of how we treat housing as just nothing more than an asset, a commercial asset. And so $15 per square foot, yeah, we're making a killing on this. And it's never enough. You're never going to get enough from linkage fees, through $400,000, or none of that stuff until you start actually changing who gets to develop in Boston, period. What are we building in Boston, period?
Okay, so we're going to get another increase. We don't know how much, but it will be happening on July 1st.
Yep, doing the work now to look at the consumer price index formulas and just solidify those numbers with the BPA research team. Moving along.
And on the Navy Yard, Counselor, absolutely yes, we'd be happy to share that accounting with you. I think the thing we get the most questions about, and I'm sure you get them too, is the 2% and 4% transfer fees on previously sold residential condos in the Navy Yard. on average, just to get the high level narrative, on average, annually, the income from that is about $500,000 a year. In terms of expenditure in the Navy Yard, it is significantly greater than that. We spend quite a bit of money, over $500,000 in maintenance, and then beyond that, there are large capital expenditures. So we're spending $8 million to tear down the dilapidated power plant. We spent $2 million this year on the Navy Yard sinkhole project, one of the sinkhole that we need to repair that Michelle referenced earlier. So happy to share that. I also think it's important to recognize that the 2 and 4% the agency has committed since last year to fund Barry and team's diversity, equity, inclusion work as a dedicated funding source for that work.
Thank you. So now going a little bit into AFFH and specifically in my district. So thank you again for getting that done together. The team worked to make history. It's been effective as
I love how they we made history. We made history. We're through a housing crisis, one of the most expensive markets in the country. Oh, but we're making history. We're making history.
The Ides of March, the 15th of March, for those who don't follow Roman history, I guess. Either way, so I want to check in on that. So I know that it requires the new committee, I'll just call it the new committee, the interagency committee, to review public comments. However, there's no public comment process outlined besides what's already done for Article 80. So how are we integrating public comments on, let's say, once the historic displacement and the displacement analysis, historic inclusion and displacement analysis reports are up, and they put out their assessment tool? Where does the public get to comment and what space? I also am curious about the personnel support. Do you need more staff? I know Michelle's doing an amazing job, but is there maybe it might be helpful to have another staffer to help coordinate research? I don't know. The community and housing profile map website is really good, so compliments to whoever did that. However, a dynamic displacement risk analysis and mapping is lacking, so I'm just curious when that's going to be up.
See, and that's another thing that recently passed, was that they have to make a displacement analysis, similar to whenever you're about to do a large-scale development, you have to have like an environmental analysis. How will this impact the local environment? Look, they recently passed that they need to do a displacement. How will this impact gentrification and displacement? And as Lydia just expressed, that seems to be nowhere to be found.
And then projects next to vacant land, water, or other underdeveloped land, I think might skew some of the results of your AFFH analysis. So how are you compensating for when there's like vacant land around there to help make sure that there's a true depiction of displacement and historic exclusion? So that's the AFFH kind of analysis.
All right, I actually just looked at the time. We're gonna leave it there. Coming up on it. Thank you to the people hopping on the Twitch and the YouTube. I know I got a sub or two during that. The TikTok crew, you're great. TikZob, thanks for sticking around. And to everyone else, take care. Have a great evening. And I'll see you tomorrow.